Hello and welcome. You're watching Big Picture with me, Vishal Dahiya, and today we're going to talk about the issue of climate change and why and how the developed nations need to step up their efforts as far as this particular issue is concerned. In fact, the US Special Presidential Envoy on Climate Change, John Kerry, called on the Prime Minister Narendra Modi and met senior ministers of the cabinet as well during his two-day visit to India, with a focus on upcoming Leaders Summit on Climate scheduled for 22nd and 23rd of April, as well as climate issues in the context of COP26. While Prime Minister Modi noted that India is committed to meeting its nationally determined contributions under the Paris Agreement and that it was among the few countries on track to meet these commitments, Mr. Kerry said that the United States would support India's climate plans by facilitating affordable access to green technologies and requisite finance as well. In fact, in the first week of February this year, United Nations Secretary General had also said that developed countries must meet their commitment made over 10 years ago by them and reaffirmed in the Paris Agreement as well to mobilize $100 billion per year in climate finance to developing countries, and this must be delivered fully in the run-up to COP26. So we'll try and understand all aspects of this issue here, why and how developed countries need to do more, what exactly are they doing, and how can we achieve the goals which have been put in place as far as climate change issue is concerned. And for more on this, we're joined by two distinguished experts. Let me first introduce them to you, beginning with Professor C.K. Varshney, a well-known environmentalist and former Dean of School of Environmental Sciences in JNU. We're also joined by Urmi Goswami, Assistant Editor with the Economic Times, who keeps a lot of focus on issues related to environment there. Urmi, I'll start with you, and let's start by understanding the context of John Kerry's visit to India and the contours of what happened here and the kind of tangibles which we are looking forward to, obviously, in that Climate Leaders Summit on 22nd, 23rd of April.
Okay, so to understand John Kerry's visit to India, we need to understand where the United States stands today in terms of climate change. It has just re-entered the Paris Agreement in February. President Biden, on first day after his oath, signed an order asking that requesting the UN to let the United States back into the Paris Agreement. In February, it became its re-entry was complete. So the US is trying to make up for the lost 4 years. It had a leadership role in 2015, which it lost under the previous administration because of the position it took, and it's trying to re-establish itself. So you have to look at the Earth Day Summit, that's the April 22nd, 23rd summit, in that context. It's about the US re-establishing its leadership. Now, but you have to make that summit successful. What is leadership? Leadership is about getting other people, everybody to work together to this common endeavor. So you have to look at the Special Envoy Kerry, his visit to Asia, which is a three-nation visit. UAE, India, and Bangladesh in that context.
Okay.
So that is it. But there is another context in which we should overlay this visit, and that is the way the United States is approaching the question of its partnership with India. There is the larger geopolitical context, which is one prong of this relationship, and that is, we saw that in the after President Biden took over, we saw that in the Quad Leaders Summit. You saw it in U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin's visit to India, and now the Special Envoy Kerry's visit. So these are all high-profile events that are happening. Then there is investment, and then there is technology. So this is the context in which we have to look at this visit by the U.S. Special Envoy.
Okay. Indeed, there are, geopolitical contexts there as well with all these high-profile visits. But since we're talking about the issue of climate change here, and with United States back in the game in terms of the Paris Agreement, there overall the momentum which is building again on this issue there. Professor Varshney, I'd like to bring you in here. Internationally, if you're looking at as far as India's aspect is concerned, we've done much better than what we were expected to do in terms of meeting those commitments and in comparison to other nations as well, specifically the developing countries out there and some of the developed nations as well?
Well, we have done well, but that is not enough. In fact, it is the community of nations which have to work together because it is a global problem. And any individual country, howsoever good you may work, and you may really complete all your commitments made at the Paris Agreement, will not be enough to safeguard the country or the world as a whole. And therefore, this leadership summit becomes very critical and very important. First of all, the US has to really work very hard to catch up for the 4 years gap that they have deliberately introduced by walking out of this Paris Agreement. So they have just entered into it, and they have got a certain amount of, I should say, moral commitment to be more aggressive and to have higher ambition of this problem. For a simple reason that the amount of green fund that was promised, as you have already mentioned in your introductory remark, has not been there. And I think they must ensure and create the necessary channels by which every year $100 billion can be given to the developing countries to meet the losses that they are going to suffer on account of climate change. And the more important is that about 70 to 80%, the present day loading of the carbon is historic carbon. It is a legacy carbon, which is entirely due to the developed country, to the developed countries. And therefore, they have a moral obligation to really work very hard, as well as to take aggressive steps to demonstrate their leadership, because then only the leadership will have certain amount of demonstrable effect, as well as will be able to carry other countries together to deal with this global problem.
Okay.
I must say that this leadership summit is a very welcome step. 40 countries or 40 individuals and presidents and dignitaries and excellencies have been invited. And the purpose of the Kerry's visit here was to really prepare for this summit, as well as to really sensitize the countries so that when they come to the COP26, they have far more aggressive and far more, I should say, climate commitments, so that the kind of problem that we are facing, we can really meet the challenge.
Okay.
Just to give you an idea, that since Paris climate change, carbon dioxide emission has gone up. In fact, the progress has been very dismal. If I may say so, that it has been very disappointing. Today, the carbon dioxide concentration has breached even 420 parts per billion. So I think these are some of the very, very serious, I should say, indicators.
Okay.
WHO has come out with a recent report to show that if the present trend is not contained, then there is a chance 5 out of 1 that by 2024, the global climate temperature will be breaching 2.4 degrees Celsius, while we have agreed there that we will make effort to contain it about 1.5 over the industrial temperature that we had. So I think these are some of the things which are very disturbing, and therefore it is important that the developed countries have to come forward, demonstrate their will to cooperate, as well as to take aggressive steps to encourage other countries to really come up and do their best to deal with this human, I should say, catastrophic tragedy that we face.
Okay, indeed, those are really, really important, significant warning signs which you were pointing out there, Professor Varshney. And as you're pointing out, again, it is important for the developed nations to lead by example. Let me bring in Urmi here as well. Urmi, your views on the whys and hows of developed nations doing more in this regard, stepping up, taking the lead, leading by example, as Professor Varshney was saying. In which specific area? What is it that exactly you believe need to be done?
Look, the fact that the problem of climate change that we are facing today is is a product of a historical situation. And in 1992, when the UNFCCC, then when the convention was agreed upon, it's very clear that it's the developed countries that need to reduce their emissions, because they are the ones who actually not only emitted more but actually have benefited from it. Now, over the point is, between 1992 and 2015, when the Paris Agreement was agreed upon, the world's changed a lot, and it was felt gradually that other countries, including developing countries, need to step up as well. And basically, there is a differentiation between what developed countries will do and what developing countries will do, but that is a politically fraught question. It's constantly negotiated, it's constantly fought over. But what is very clear over these years, between 1992 and today, 2021, is that developed countries have to take the lead. So they have to do more than developing countries, and they have to ensure there are financial flows. Climate finance is given to developing countries so that developing countries can take action, and they're also helped with technology. So we are talking about finance and technology. Now, this is where the problem becomes very difficult. In 2009 and then in 2010, it was said that developed countries will provide $100 billion every year by 2020. Now, the fact of the matter remains that if you look at the problem of climate change, $100 billion is not enough. But what is also equally true is that promise of $100 billion is yet to be met. So first is this problem. Now, most of the time, the focus is always on this $100 billion. But the Paris Agreement also talks about long-term finance, which is finance beyond 2025. Because what they have done, what was agreed in Paris, was that by 2020, it will be $100 billion a year. And that is the floor, not the ceiling, the floor for up to 2025. And from 2025, there has to be a new floor. Right? And those negotiations are still being worked out as to how much it will be. So that's one. Okay. So there has to be a proper flow. Now, within that financial flow, the problem is about 80% of the financial flow that happens is in terms of loans. Now, that is a problem, because a lot of it's a lot of countries. One is, of course, the moral issue of, developed countries benefited from the emissions, a kind of economic system that is based on emissions, and creating a situation whereby other countries, developing countries, do not have enough carbon space to emit and grow. So they have to do it using newer technology, which is less emitting, but that costs money. So there is that moral question. And then when you put in the loan, if it becomes a loan, it defeats that purpose. So that's another part of the problem. And then there is, of course, technology. That is the other critical thing. You have to have access to technology. So if you ask, how is it that we want today in 2021 to translate the convention and the demand that developed countries do more, is not only that they are faster in reducing their emissions, because now we are at a situation that every country has to do, not only because we agreed in Paris, because science tells us the situation in the world is so dire. It's not enough that we depend on 40-odd Annex 1 countries, or what used to be called Annex 1, to the convention, that is the developed countries, to reduce their emissions. We all have to do it. Also, because there is economic benefit to do it. So, but there has to be proper flow of finance, climate finance, and climate technology. That is where the focus should be.
Okay. So obviously, finance is one very crucial aspect there, and that entire flow as well, how it is coming, how will that be utilized, and so is the green technology part there. Professor Varshney, your views on these two aspects, the road ahead in terms of ensuring that, those financial commitments are adhered to in a very structured manner, and there is a planned movement ahead of utilization of those finances. And also in terms of green technologies, Professor Varshney, what are we looking forward to here in terms of what the developed nations need to do?
I think the developed nations have to do much more than what they have been doing so far. In fact, they have to really increase their effort by quantum jump. And let me tell you that it is in the benefit, it will benefit only them as well as the world as a whole. And I will give you 2, 3 examples of that. Number one, the new technology need to be developed for which resources are needed. And the developed countries are well placed to really apply as well as deploy the resources for doing that. And then sharing these technologies with the rest of the world so that overall the globe becomes little more safe place to survive. And when that happens, it only also helps them in a big way. Secondly, it will create new jobs. New technology brings new jobs. And therefore, the job market will also get greatly benefited. And that will contribute to the economy as a whole. So I think this contribution, which is being talked about, need to be given as, I should say, as a catalyst to really rejig the whole economy, which is the green economy, and we have to make green technology and all that. There is another important aspect that the developed countries has to look their lifestyle very critically and carefully, which is very, very wasteful as well as very, very heavy on the environment in many different ways, apart from carbon dioxide. For example, 33% of the agriculture produce simply goes waste without eating. And also their industrial agriculture is very wasteful and has high carbon emission impact. Now, these are the things where the developed countries have to change, as well as their supply lines are so big that in order to transport their food from one corner to the next, it requires a lot of carbon emission. So these are the kind of things where a lot of carbon economy can be exercised. And I think with great profit, they can do it. So there are 2 things. First is they have to tighten their belt. And secondly, they have to I should say, liberally fund the research, and output of that research they must share. And once they do that, I think it will encourage the international trade, and it will really help us to maintain or at least cap the carbon dioxide further rise, which is very threatening. And in fact, it will help us to really have agriculture. At the same time, these things are also going to be very rewardful in many different ways. The biodiversity will be greatly saved along with this, because the climate change and the biodiversity, these are 2 very much closely connected and subjects. The climate change also affects biodiversity, and ultimately the food resources, the future of the food resources is all dependent on intact and robust biodiversity. So I think in the long term as well as in the short term, it is in the best interest that the developed countries must come forward and have a very liberal attitude towards this, and must aggressively really commit to contain and to really get over the problem of carbon dioxide emission. There is another important aspect on which they have to devote, that it is not only the emission, but at the same time, it is the adaptation, as well as they also have to really provide fund for containing, so to say, natural disasters, because disaster mitigation as well as prevention is very important along with climate change, because these things again go together. So I think these are the areas which are very challenging, where they have to really come aggressively. You see the kind of flood that has been in United States because of the extreme climate event, as well as the forest fires which have raged. All these things are such which are economically undermining the welfare. So I think the new model has to be adopted, and it has to be seen in new light. And that really tells us that more aggressive climate commitments have to be made. And for that, I'm sure that the leadership summit will really ginger up ideas as well as encourage the other participants to come up with more aggressive commitments and greater, I should say, commitment to the climate cause.
Indeed. And as you're pointing out, the dangers of climate change are for all of us to see. across the globe, and the way you're pointing out in terms of aggressive commitments from developed nations, that's obviously one of the important aspects of this battle, again, in the context of climate change. But let's, quickly look at one more aspect here, and I'll start with you, Urmi. We have less time left, so a quick response on India's role with this entire issue there, and then given the fact that we are one of the developing countries which has so far successfully, fulfilled its climate commitments regularly.
India is one of those countries that it takes its international commitments very seriously, and we have done so with climate change as well. But here is where I will sort of differ from the general sort of thinking and look at it slightly differently. When we talk climate change, we only think in terms of the UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement. I think climate change is a far bigger thing, and we need to stop thinking within the four corners of the agreement. We need to think bigger. And the truth is that the world is the developed world, the biggest economies. We are part of the Major Economies Forum, which is what the April 22nd meet is. It's a rejuvenation of the Major Economies Forum. They are talking in terms of changing the basis of the economy. We are looking at an economy which is a low carbon economy, which basically means it's a transformation. And I think India, yes, it's true, as the Prime Minister put it, as Minister Javadekar puts it, and countless experts put it, India is among those countries, is among those few countries, and perhaps the only G20 country that is on track to meet its Paris Agreement. But that should be our floor. It should not be our ceiling. We should be looking at the ways in which we become the leaders. India has this special place in the world, which is we are part of the G20, but we also have huge developmental challenges, which basically means we can converse and understand and come up with solutions that have validity in least developed countries, in vulnerable communities, as well as be a part of G20. We should be looking, our focus should be to ensure that the developed world meets its commitments on finance, on technology. But we should also be aggressively part of that group, which actually develops these technologies, because that is going to be the new economy. Is going to be one which is constrained by climate. It's defined by climate. And we cannot afford to be falling backwards by saying we are keeping to our Paris Agreement goals. No, we have to get ahead of us, because that is where economic growth is. If we want to develop, if we want to be a $5 trillion economy by 2024, this is the path to embrace.
Indeed. Professor Varshney, quick concluding comments from you on this aspect, India's role vis-a-vis this, a global fight on the issue of climate change and the challenges therein.
I think the India is doing very well and is doing its best. And perhaps we are going to meet the commitments much earlier than what is anticipated. You see, we have created Global Alliance, which is, to my mind, is a very, very important step, where the India not only is thinking for its own benefit, but is thinking for the benefit for a much larger community of nations. So I think we are having not only our national goals on which we are working, but we are also having our international, I should say, some kind of commitment where we are really involving others to join us and to move forward in tandem to meet the climate change. So this is number one. We have always had in our practice that we not only think nationally, but at the same time, we also think globally. And this has been shown with respect to the COVID vaccine, and it has been shown on many other occasions. Let me also tell you one thing, that so far the climate change negotiation, as well as activities, has been done from a nationalistic point of view. And I think this point of view has to be divorced completely if we have to tackle with climate change issue, which is a global. So any nationalistic interest they put forward to deal with the climate change is going to really not only be doomed, but the entire nation or the whole world is going to be doomed. And I think that kind of I should say, the tectonic change in our negotiation has to come, and understanding has to develop, so that we are able to think globally and collectively and cooperatively, and we take a very aggressive and a very progressive step to contain the emission of carbon dioxide and decarbonize our economy and living standard.
Okay, indeed, that's the gist of it. Thank you so much, Professor Varshney, as well as Urmi, for sharing your views and insights on this aspect with our viewers. There it is, all about the issue of climate change. And as our panelists were pointing out, we will have to think big and look at the larger picture here. And specifically, the developed countries will have to step up and aggressively make the commitments as well as fulfill them in the time frame given if we have to successfully tackle the challenge of climate change. We'll come back again tomorrow with a different topic. Till then, keep watching and stay safe. Do not forget to adhere to the COVID-19 appropriate behavior. Thank you.